Take this with a huge scoop of salt. I am very biased when it comes to group tutoring because I personally tried 3 different group tutoring centers when I was younger and it did not work out. Partly this was due to my personality, but the other part was really due to the structure and the nature of it, which didn't suit me. It might work for you, but it definitely did not work for me. Let's get into it. I'm going to first talk about my personality so that you can actually see whether you can apply my experience to you and your child. So in terms of personality, when I was younger, I was quite shy, I wasn't very confident, and I was quite self-conscious about my looks, my grades, as well as I found myself comparing what I was doing in terms of academics to the people around me. So what happens inevitably is that this makes it so that I'm always seeing whether I'm performing better or worse compared to the people around me in the class that I was given in. I was afraid to ask questions, and during those exams, I was quite self-conscious about it. At times, even though I was improving a little bit, or maybe I wasn't getting the marks that I actually expected, maybe getting 50 to 60% in the actual test, I was feeling that I was bombing out. I wasn't doing well, and that I felt like I was falling behind. When in reality, when I actually did the selective exam and got the marks, I made it into Penrith High School, which at the time, it has a respectable minimum entry level score. So in order for me to get in, I had to be higher than the average in terms of the people who took the selective exam. So I was by no means actually behind, but when I was attending group tutoring, I actually felt really behind. I was placed in a class of about 20 to 30 students. There was an accelerated class and not accelerated class. I was actually in the accelerated one, but because of my marks, I was actually put in the not accelerated one, so the B class. Because of that as well, I felt like I wasn't performing well when everyone else is performing much better than me in terms of those mock exams. I actually had little to no hope in actually trying to get into a selective school. So that was actually quite damaging in terms of my self-esteem, and I would actually be quite reluctant to ask questions as a result if I didn't understand it. In retrospect, this does sound quite foolish now looking back at it, but at the time it was a huge deal. Even though my parents are saying, hey, just ask a question if you don't understand. I think it was easier said than done because I was so insecure about asking it. And even though I might say, hey sir, how to actually answer this? They might give a 1 to 2 sentence explanation. And they said, do you understand now? And I'll just say yes, because everyone else is looking at me, or I felt like everyone was looking at me, and I did not want to be judged accordingly. This would go on and on where my parents would actually say, hey, we're actually paying thousands to actually do that. And especially as someone who didn't come from a well-off, I guess in terms of financial household, it was actually a tough order. So I would force myself to ask these questions, but the teacher, because they actually have to cater towards the entire class, as well as the fact that they're just ticking boxes in terms of saying out the answer, and we're self-marking our own papers and we're self-marking our own homework actually. It was actually quite difficult for me to get an in-depth response. They wouldn't actually probe further, and I wouldn't actually probe further. Partly it was my fault, but due to the structure of group tutoring classes as well, it was, I would say it's part of their responsibility as well, where they knew that I was struggling. I was not getting the marks that were actually needed. I was actually put into the lower class. But due to the structure of the class, they couldn't give me the extra support that I required as well. This resulted in me falling behind in certain topics, as well as have a feeling of dread when it came to the class as well. So I would go to class with the homework, wouldn't even be confident in actually completing the homework because it was actually really difficult for me anyway in terms of the skill level. And there will always be a huge stack, and the class was 4 to 5 hours. So it was really quite long, especially because it was after school, but I would not look forward to it. So after a while, instead of me looking forward to actually class and actually learning, my objectives in terms of my priorities actually shifted. I was actually there for other reasons, such as making friends from other schools in the neighborhood, just meeting up with people who were like-minded, who actually like the same games and interests in me. And that's how I kind of bonded with the people around me, instead of what I should be doing is actually learning and progressing so that I can increase my chances of getting to the highest possible selective school that I was actually trying to go for, which at the time was Green High School. On top of that as well, some of the group tutoring classes, they would actually give us freebies and branded stuff, so such as some free stationery if you get a certain mark and stuff like that, or they give you a bag with their logo on it. So things like that, and they also give you some snacks, would actually try to entice me and say, oh, I'm not happy, but then I'll get that, and it's like a short-term win for me. So it doesn't make sense financially as well, because we are paying thousands for these small freebies, but as a child, as someone who was quite insecure, that was enough for me in order to satisfy what I kind of needed, or kind of what I thought was needed for me to actually get by for those 4 to 5 hours. In saying that as well, if this is happening to you and your child, or if you have a feeling this is happening to you and your child, try to probe a little bit deeper, because it is going to be a huge warning sign that you are not going to get the most out of your money. It's been a waste of time for you and your child, and there has been some underlying fundamental problems in terms of their learning, because if they're focused on other things like that instead of their learning, then things are kind of unraveling, and it's important for you to find out what it is specifically in order to tackle it. Secondly, for certain topics, I learn quickly. So for reading and writing, essentially for those 2 aspects of the selective exam, I was actually really good at that. So when they talk about a concept or they talk about something, I got it, while other students took longer than that. So when they had to ask questions because they didn't understand it, or they had to spend an hour or 2 on the actual homework and they needed some extra help, the rest of the class would sit and wait. We would be sitting, talking, thinking about different things, and not actually learning, which we actually were there for. That was our number 1 reason there. But because I actually got those concepts quicker, then it was a bit of a waste of time for me. On the flip side of things, for maths and general ability, that's where I struggled with it. It doesn't mean sometimes you have to talk about it once, twice, 3 times, and I still don't get it. I need actionable examples, and I need actual tailored support. And sometimes asking a question and they give me whatever written on their paper in terms of the explanation or answer wasn't enough for me. I needed in-depth support and explanation, and maybe a couple of practice questions in order for me to fully understand it. But due to the nature of it, I would try to ask a question and everyone has to wait. So it wasn't the most efficient use of time because of the nature of group classes. Group classes is they have to move on. They cater to the majority. And if you're part of the minority, which at times I was, whether it was I was ahead or whether it was behind, I was the minority. And I didn't feel like I got the support that I needed. So when I was thinking about everything besides actually learning, I was not in the deep work state. And if you're not familiar with this term, it means that when you're so focused on one individual task, so in terms of your efficiency and productivity, it's 2 to 4 times more productive and efficient compared to if you're multitasking and thinking about everything. Since I was not in that state, I was literally thinking about, what I was eating afterwards. Maybe I was eating some KFC after actual tutoring class. I was thinking about the next day. I was thinking about, what the people around me were thinking, everything except actually learning at those times as well. So I was not in that deep work state. I was multitasking and I was kind of daydreaming at times. So it's definitely not the most practical use of my mum's money and my time, or even my own money and time as well. Something you might be thinking is, why don't you just enroll in subjects a weekend? Why do you have to enroll in everything? Well, at the time, I'm not too sure if they're happening right now, but if you enroll in all the subjects for selective, then you get a certain % off. So you might get 10% off if you pay before a certain date. You might get some more % off if you're enrolling through the entire course. And there's a bit of a FOMO happening. So my mum would see that other students would just send you to the group tutoring class, which in your local neighborhood, and they're like, obviously we weren't financially well off, but since everyone else is going there, we had to go there, or we felt like we had to go there. So we would enroll in everything and try to do that. And it wasn't the most efficient use because of their marketing practices, where they say, well, you don't have to enroll in everything, but you just have to pay more if it's only individual subjects. As opposed to if you enroll in everything here, you get X amount off. So it's kind of enticing parents that actually want to enroll in everything because you don't want them to fall short in certain areas. You might also be asking, why don't you just ask questions then? What's holding you back? Just ask questions. Well, think about this in context. At the time, I was 10, 11, 12 years old, and it's actually easier said than done. So my parents would say, just ask questions if you don't understand. But when everyone is literally looking at you, sometimes they're rolling their eyes. If you're asking a more simple or basic question, you are kind of inclined to not ask any more questions. You don't really want to do that. You don't feel like it's a safe environment for you to ask questions because of this judgment. Doesn't matter if it was a class of 20 that I was in, or even if it was a class of 5 other students. If it was a class of 5 other students, I wouldn't want the other 4 students there to look at me and think that I'm not very smart. It's just not good for my self-esteem in the first place. So I'm now going to go through the pros and cons of group tutoring. And trust me, the pros are going to be quite short. So let's just get into it. So the first pro is, you know that your child needs extra support. You might want to help them get better marks in NAPLAN or get into a selective school or OC. So you try to go to the local tutoring center down the street and they have group tutoring classes. You want the best for your child, and you know that the value of education is important to opening up doors for them in the future. I get that. And you know that your personal expertise and knowledge isn't enough to show them. So maybe you've tried to tutor them yourselves, but they're just not getting it. They just need that extra support and you can't provide it. Try to enroll them to someone and you want them to learn from the best. However, my interpretation here and where the problem lies is, how do we know that they're actually the best? What if they have less knowledge and expertise than what you have yourself? So in order for you to actually know if they're good for your child and they actually know what they're talking about, you have to have an intimate conversation with the actual teacher that's going to do it. Not the center, so not the person actually, managing the entire thing, but you want to talk to the teacher who will actually be teaching your child. And after the lesson or after the first lesson, you have to actually know what they actually covered, if they have set up any goals and strategies in place. What is their teaching structure? How is that different? If you don't even know who your teacher is, if you don't even know in terms of what their goal is and what they've actually covered in terms of the topics, then this is going to be a huge alarm bell, because it means that you're just going through the motions of sending your child to the center and expecting results, but they're not getting it. If you have to know in terms of communication what they're covering. So if you actually call them up, or you actually go to the actual center, and they just give you a brochure with the money, 10 weeks, pay this, and for all these subjects, and you're okay with that, then that's up to you. But in my opinion, I think that's ridiculous. And I think that if they don't spend time in trying to probe your individual problems and create a goal that's tailored to your child, I think that's a waste of time. But if they do that, then that's when you can kind of say, okay, well, let's talk more. Let's see if we can actually see and create this work. But chances are in group tutoring centers, essentially, you don't even know who your teacher is. You have a different teacher for maths, general ability, etc., etc. So you're never going to speak to them, or maybe you're only going to speak to them at the beginning and at the very end, but what happens to the 9 weeks in between? So why am I hating on group tutoring when they're not providing something tailored? Surely there's going to be some benefit. And yes, there is going to be some benefit. So they have a cookie cutter template. So every branch for that particular company, they say, okay, for week 1, everyone in every state, in every branch has to learn this. Week 2, they have to learn this. Week 3, they have to learn this. But as we both know, and we're not idiots here, we know the value of education and that every student learns differently. One person is good at English and one person is good at maths, have an inefficient use of their time, so other people are going to be asking certain things, or if they are already across one topic, then that week is kind of a waste. Secondly, the second pro is, you think you are learning from people who know what they're talking about. So chances are you're going to these tutoring places because you know that you can actually assist them yourself, so that they have the experts and the people with the right expertise to actually teach them. But chances are, typically what happens in group tutoring centers is that they actually have people, okay, well, you went to a good school, you got a good ATAR, you're hired. So they think that a good score relates and translates to being a good teacher. But this is a common misconception that I think it's important for you to recognize. Having a good mark does not necessarily translate into becoming a good teacher. Where does it say that? I might be getting some good marks because I attend a selective school, I might have did that, but does that actually mean that I'll be a great teacher and I can be able to teach anyone? No, that does not mean that at all. And I think that's why it's important for you to do due diligence and to do the research that is required for you to understand if they do know what they're talking about. So in the initial conversation when you have with them, ask them, what is the strategy? What is the goals that they have? And what is their teaching style? And if you talk about your child, and their problems and their unique goals, and they talk about a different goal that's not really suited to them, then you already know that they have a cookie cutter approach. Or if they don't even talk about that and they say, oh, I don't really do that, I just follow what's kind of given to me in terms of the lesson outline, which is what is done in group tutoring centers, then you can already see how much value are you actually getting in these lessons in the first place. But don't get me wrong, these students that are hired at these group tutoring centers, they might actually be good teachers. However, they are going to take time, and everyone's going to take time in order for them to develop and fully form into becoming good teachers with enough experience. So if they're in their first year of teaching, it's going to take them at least 6 to 12 months in order for them to be semi-decent. So if they have no teaching experience, which is sometimes what happens in these group tutoring centers, you graduate high school and you're placed as the teacher in one of these classes, then how efficient and how practical are you in order for you to break down certain concepts, especially trying to teach to other children? That's going to be different. It might be an easier transition if you're the first year of university and you taught the same texts and subjects that you took in year 12, so it's quite recent in your mind. But it's going to be a completely different ball game if someone in university has to teach someone in primary school, because you haven't done those topics and those subjects in about 5-6 years. You can probably answer them without much problems, but if you can't break them down and teach them to someone else in a very digestible and clear way, then that's going to be a waste of time as well. The third pro is, from a business point of view, it's much easier to actually set up and organize group classes. This is a huge benefit for the business, but a huge con for parents. So for parents, they say, wow, thousands of students enrolled at this learning institution and they got X amount of people getting to James Lewis and Balcombe Hills. Yeah, they must be great. But if out of thousands of students, there must be some who are already quite bright and they can actually thrive in group classes. But for students that are not in that upper area, who were like me, that were semi-decent, but not actually super smart, I would say, or who are students who are falling behind, you are not going to get the true value from this at all. It's a big reason why Bill Gates, in terms of their Gates Foundation, they donated and actually invested in educational companies and educational programs which did one-on-one tutoring and groups of 2 in terms of their mentorship and their tutoring programs in the United States. They found that in terms of their studies, they were able to catch up and at times even get ahead, especially when students were placed in these programs where they were given specialized assistance as opposed to only be given group classes. So if Bill Gates can actually see the potential in here, I can think that you can actually see that there is a different avenue in just going to group classes in the very first place. Does that necessarily mean that one-on-one tutoring is always better than group classes? Not necessarily, but there is going to be a higher likelihood that you're going to get more benefit from this. And the fourth pro that they have is they have a lot of resources. There's no argument here. They definitely have a lot of resources because they have the manpower, and if they have 20 to 30 kids in one lesson, I surely hope that they can invest some into actually creating new resources. I'll be concerned if they don't. They're getting that much in terms of their revenue. If they don't create more resources and new content and more papers for you to actually complete, then that is going to be a significant problem. So what I'm actually thinking is group classes make sense if you actually want them to create test papers. If you have mock exams and you want your child to get the good feel of the selective exam, for instance, then enroll them into one of those test programs. So every week they do a test, and it doesn't matter if it's a group, because they have a test that they need to complete every single week. They are compared in terms of their scores. I think that's quite practical, and it's something that smaller classes or even one-on-one classes can actually do. They have a lot of resources in group classes, so you want to take advantage for that. But if you want your child to learn the fundamentals, learn the principles behind the content that is being taught in these exams and in what is actually going to be taught in terms of the syllabus, then maybe group classes is not the best use, because as we talked about, it's not the most efficient use of your time and money, depending on your child's needs. The word of warning I want to share with you is this: when you do join a group class or group tutoring class, know what you are getting yourself into. What do I get and what do you get? So when things do turn south, and in every educational journey, it does turn south and things turn bad, how are they going to support your child in order to get them into the better school or improve their marks? If they don't have an actionable plan and they say, okay, well, I see that your son's struggling and they've been struggling for 2 semesters already, and you come to us and you say that that they need extra support, then how about you sign up to this other program in the holiday? It's a 2-week workshop every single day, and they can get accelerated and try to catch up there. Only $1,000. Are you excited? That's something that they might actually do. So think about what you're getting yourself into, and if you're okay with that, then that's fine. And if you somehow relate to what I talked about in terms of my experiences and my interpretation of group tutoring when I was younger, then you can use that information and you can make an informed decision because you have time. I didn't have the luxury of someone telling me this, so I unfortunately just had to go with the flow, and my mother had to go with the flow in terms of going to these classes because there wasn't a viable alternative at the time. Overall, that's a little bit of my interpretation. Like I said, take it with a truckload of salt. I'm very biased with this and I'm very strong in my stance towards this. Other students and other parents, they might have a different view, and that's okay. But if what I said resonated with you or your child in any way, then look at other options, because clearly group tutoring is not for you. Thank you guys. Like this video, comment down below, and if you have any question in particular that you want to actually speak to me about, then you can visit bigsacademy.com and I'll be happy to chat with you there. Thank you guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye.